Hello, Virgo. Welcome to Virgo. I'm here today to do your reading. This is for Virgo Sun, Moon, Rising, and Venus signs. Okay, so something is moving through you right now that's bigger than words can hold, isn't it? A recognition so profound it's reaching past your intellectual defenses straight into the tender, unprotected center where truth lives. And what's breaking open in you isn't just emotion for its own sake, but soul level knowing. The kind that rearranges everything you thought you understood about who you are and what your life can become. Let me share what I'm perceiving in the revolutionary frequencies surrounding you right now. The first thing breaking through is this sensation you might be experiencing of old grief finally finding its exit. You could be picking up on tears that aren't just about present circumstances, but about accumulated pain you've been carrying for years. Sorrow you never had permission to fully feel, losses you never properly mourned, disappointments you swallowed and tried to move past without processing. You might be sensing that crying now is release. Not breakdown, but breakthrough, where your body is finally evacuating toxicity that's been stored in your cells, and that cathartic purging is creating space for something new to enter that couldn't fit while you were still clutching onto what needed to be released. Here's what you could be observing in the landscape of your internal experience. You might be noticing that walls you've maintained are crumbling without your conscious effort to dismantle them, that defenses you built to survive, circumstances that no longer exist, are revealing themselves as obsolete, as barriers not to pain but to joy, to connection, to aliveness. You could be picking up on yourself softening, armor melting, cynicism giving way to tentative hope, and that vulnerability emerging feels terrifying and liberating simultaneously because you're discovering that being undefended doesn't actually destroy you, it reveals you, and what's being revealed is more beautiful and more powerful than the protected version ever was. What's erupting through the existential substrate is that you could be dealing with a moment of absolute clarity about what matters. You might be sensing that distractions you've been investing in, pursuits you've been chasing, relationships you've been maintaining out of obligation rather than authentic desire, all of it is being illuminated as peripheral to what's actually essential. You could be picking up on sudden, visceral understanding of your priorities, of what you actually value versus what you've been conditioned to pursue. And that clarity is simultaneously simplifying and complicating your life because now you know what to release, but release requires courage. You're still gathering. This reflection invites you to consider what you've been tolerating, that this moment of clarity is showing you can no longer accept, and whether the tears you're crying are mourning what you're losing or celebrating what you're finally ready to claim. You might be noticing that you're experiencing this as spiritual awakening as much as emotional release. You could be picking up on yourself seeing reality differently, perceiving connections you missed before, understanding patterns that were invisible to you, accessing wisdom that doesn't come from your personal history, but from something deeper and more universal. You might be sensing that veil is thinning, that you're touching truth about existence, about love, about meaning that's been available all along, but you weren't ready to perceive until now. And that expanded awareness is changing not just how you think, but how you experience being alive. What's radiating through the transformational channels is that you could be dealing with recognition of your own resilience. You might be sensing that what you've survived, what you've endured, what you've overcome is actually extraordinary. That strength you didn't know you possessed has been carrying you through circumstances that would have broken someone with less capacity. You could be picking up on your own power, not power as domination, but as deep, unshakable core that's weathered storms and remained intact. And acknowledging that power, finally giving yourself credit for how much you've handled, is bringing tears of recognition, of self compassion, of honoring yourself in ways you've withheld because you thought you had to keep being strong, instead of acknowledging that being strong is exhausting and you deserve to rest. What's particularly intense about what I'm witnessing is that you might be approaching decision that will alter your entire trajectory. You could be sensing choice point where you either honor what this moment of clarity is revealing or ignore it and continue on path that no longer fits. And knowing that staying in familiar discomfort is no longer tenable, that this awakening has made pretending impossible, is creating pressure that's contributing to emotional intensity. You might be picking up on irreversibility of this awareness, understanding that once you've seen what you now see, you can't unsee it, and that permanent shift in consciousness is both liberation from old limitations and responsibility to live differently than you've been living. Um, you might be observing that you're experiencing grief for time you feel you've wasted. You could be picking up on regret about years spent in situations that didn't serve you, anger at yourself for not leaving sooner, sadness about who you could have been if you'd made different choices. You might be sensing self recrimination mixing with tears. And while that's understandable, it's also important to recognize that every experience brought you here, that you couldn't have arrived at this clarity without the journey that preceded it, and punishing yourself for taking the path you took doesn't honor the person you were who did their best with awareness they had at the time. What's threading through the temporal architecture is that you could be dealing with March specifically as a significant marker. You might be sensing that this month carries weight in your personal timeline, that shifts happening now are initiating cycle that will unfold across coming year, that seeds being planted in your consciousness right now are going to produce fruit you can't yet imagine. You could be picking up on beginning energy, on this being launch point rather than culmination, and understanding that intensity you're feeling isn't final catharsis, but opening salvo of transformation that will continue to develop helps you hold your current overwhelm as temporary intensity rather than permanent state. This reflection invites you to consider what you're being called to birth through this breakdown, and whether you're willing to trust that what's falling apart needs to fall apart so something more aligned with who you're becoming can be constructed in its place. You might be noticing that you're experiencing this as connected to specific relationship or connection. You could be picking up on someone who's been catalyst for your transformation, whose presence or absence has cracked you open in ways nothing else could. You might be sensing that your tears are about this person, but also about what they represent, about your capacity to love, to be hurt, to risk, to hope, and recognizing that they've served as mirror or teacher or activator of growth you needed helps you hold complexity of gratitude and pain simultaneously without needing to simplify the relationship into purely good or purely harmful. What's also surfacing is that you could be dealing with permission finally being granted to feel what you've been suppressing. You might be experiencing yourself allowing emotions you've kept contained, sadness you deemed unacceptable, anger you thought made you bad, vulnerability you believed meant weakness. You could be picking up on internal permission structure shifting and discovering that emotions don't destroy you when you let them move through. That feeling fully is actually what allows completion rather than creating endless suffering. That's revolutionary understanding. That's changing your relationship with your own internal experience. The vibrational blueprints suggest you might be experiencing this crying as physically healing. You could be sensing release in your body as tears flow, tension leaving shoulders, pressure releasing from chest, headache you've carried dissolving. You might be picking up on somatic wisdom of emotion, on your body's intelligence that knows crying is designed to discharge overwhelm, to reset nervous system, to metabolize experience that's too big to process cognitively, and trusting your body's process instead of trying to stop tears because crying seems weak or inconvenient is honoring biological imperative toward health. What's significant is that you could be approaching visibility of your transformation. You might be sensing that internal shifts you're experiencing are going to become externally obvious, that you're going to start making choices that reveal to others how much you've changed. You could be picking up on approaching period where you'll need to communicate boundaries, make announcements, take actions that demonstrate your new priorities. And knowing that your evolution is going to disrupt other people's expectations is part of what's making this so emotionally charged, because you're not just changing yourself, you're changing how you show up in every relationship and system you're part of. This reflection invites you to consider who in your life is going to struggle with the version of you that's emerging, and whether you're prepared to maintain your transformation even when others prefer you remained who you were because that version was easier for them to relate to. Um, you might be picking up on this as moment of choosing yourself finally. You could be experiencing recognition that you've been accommodating everyone else's needs, preferences, comfort, contorting yourself to fit into spaces and roles that require you to be smaller, quieter, more agreeable than you actually are. You might be sensing rebellion rising, not destructive rebellion, but healthy assertion of your right to exist fully, to take up space, to prioritize your own well being without guilt. And that shift from self abandonment to self loyalty is creating tears that are part grief for how long you betrayed yourself and part relief that you're finally stopping. What I'm witnessing in the probability matrices is that you could be dealing with a situation where crying is literally changing chemistry of your experience. You might be noticing that after tears, things look different, that problems that seemed insurmountable feel more manageable, that hopelessness that was crushing you has lifted slightly. You could be picking up on neurobiological reality of emotional release. On-way crying actually alters your brain state, recalibrates your nervous system, creates opening for different perspective. And trusting that process means allowing yourself to cry fully instead of cutting it off prematurely because you're uncomfortable with intensity. The resonant frequencies suggest you might be experiencing this as collective as much as personal. You could be sensing that your individual transformation is connected to larger shifts, that you're part of wave of people waking up, choosing authenticity, releasing conditioning that kept them compliant. You might be picking up on yourself as participant in collective evolution and understanding that your personal healing contributes to collective healing, that your courage to change gives others permission to change. That's adding dimension of meaning to your experience that makes it feel sacred rather than just difficult. What's also coming through is that you could be dealing with reconciliation with yourself. You might be experiencing forgiveness towards yourself for mistakes you've made, for ways you've hurt others or yourself, for times you knew better but couldn't do better. You could be picking up on compassion, finally extending toward your past self. And that self forgiveness, that release of shame and judgment you've been carrying, is contributing to tears because it's reunion with parts of yourself you exiled, integration of shadow material you rejected, wholeness replacing fragmentation. This reflection invites you to consider what becomes available to you when you stop using energy to maintain self-hatred, and whether that reclaimed energy could be redirected toward actually building life you want instead of punishing yourself for not having built it yet. You might be noticing that you're experiencing this as preparation for major action. You could be picking up on yourself, gathering strength through this release. That crying is clearing space, creating foundation, preparing you to do something you've been too scared to do. You might be sensing that emotional catharsis is precursor to practical change. And understanding that connection helps you see tears not as weakness, but as necessary stage in process of transformation, as storm that clears air so you can see clearly enough to take next steps. So as you move through this intensity, as tears flow and clarity emerges, and your life begins its reorganization, practice staying present with what's actually occurring rather than escaping into distraction. You might be experiencing urge to numb, to shut down the feeling, to return to familiar numbness that's less intense, even if it's less alive. But what I'm witnessing is someone ready to feel everything, ready to stop protecting themselves from life, ready to be cracked open because that's where light gets in and also where light gets out, where you become luminous, not despite your breaking, but because of it. Trust that crying doesn't make you weak. You might have internalized messages about needing to hold it together, about tears being manipulation or self-indulgence or sign of inability to cope. But what if crying is actually sign of your humanity, of your capacity to feel deeply, of your courage to let yourself be moved by your own experience? What if the real weakness is shutting down, is refusing to feel, is staying defended against your own truth? This changes your life not because single moment of crying has magic power, but because you're finally allowing transformation that's been building for years to complete. You might be crying now because you're finally safe enough, because you finally created conditions where you can fall apart knowing you'll survive it, where you can let go of control knowing you won't disintegrate completely. And that safety, internally generated, self provided, is the real change, is the foundation everything else will be built on. March 2026 is your marker. You might look back on this month as when everything shifted, as dividing line between before and after, as moment you finally chose yourself, chose truth, chose aliveness over numbness. Let it be that. Let this break you open. And trust that what emerges from this breaking is stronger, more authentic, more capable of joy than what you were before. You're not falling apart, you're falling together. You're becoming whole. And yes, sometimes becoming whole requires tears that feel like they'll never stop, but they will stop. And when they do, when your eyes clear and you see what's in front of you with new sight, you're going to recognize yourself finally. Not who you've been pretending to be, not who everyone needed you to be, but who you actually are. Underneath all the protection and performance and that person, that real you emerging through the tears, is magnificent. Let yourself see it, let yourself be it. Let this be the moment that changes everything because you're finally ready to be changed.